I'm going to start today's podcast talking about this Danny Hurley story. If you go back to last week and then the stuff that Bill and I did on Sunday until we heard that Hurley had turned down the Lakers on Monday, I guess the whole time I was like, I wonder what this is. Like something doesn't sit right. Whether it was the JJ stuff building and who was reporting that and how accurate any of that was. And then the last minute pivot from Hurley, knowing that he had a contract on the table from UConn, like what went into this. But there's a lot of different ways I want to talk about this subject. So we know that the offer was 6 years, $70 million. The salary would put him at about $11.7 million per year, which would be fifth in NBA salary. So it is the Lakers. I don't care who you are, basketball lifer, Lakers, that kind of salary. But did the salary need to be more to actually close the deal for Hurley? Well, apparently so, or maybe just UConn is still and continues to be the right fit for him at this point in his life. But when I think about Hurley to the Lakers and what it would mean, I always like talking about how we talk about coaches. And I would say that for the most part, when we talk about head coaches in football and in basketball, we're incredibly simple. I don't really know why that happens or why it's so hard for us. I'll admit I have a hard time knowing emphatically like, hey, this coach was really bad tonight, or this coach conversely was really good. Whenever you're bringing in a new head coach to replace the former person, clearly there was something wrong for the other guy to be fired. And I think more often than not, it has nothing to do with what happens within basketball games. It just means over the course of multiple seasons, the players tune them out. And with players that are this special, for any time you're managing or having to manage people that are this talented, it just means that eventually they're going to kind of like believe that they're always right and that you're always wrong. And that means there's going to be a lot of turnover in that profession. And that's what we have in coaching. But there's a couple different things that happen with the way we talk about it. One is the kind of don't screw it up approach, which is probably no better example in basketball than the Mark Jackson to Steve Kerr approach, or that transition where it's like, okay, this is a good team. Things turned around with Mark Jackson, but man, it feels like there's another level that we can't really seem to get to. And it got proven out pretty quickly with Kerr. I mean, that's like one of the all-time examples. And you even have guys that are on the team then, still on the team, that were there for both, that were like, yeah, I think they've been nice about how they've mentioned how much that improved the overall situation. Then you have the coaches that outperform expectations. So those guys have to be good, right? I mean, Spoelstra's the best example of outperforming expectations. I think the 23 Heat run is one of the most impressive runs by a team in modern playoff history, because I just don't think that team was that good. And they're playing for an NBA championship, even over the course of the games at Denver. The gap like finally showed up the way I kept thinking it was going to show up throughout the East. But we know Spo is really good. I think he's the best. But why do I think he's the best? Because they throw a ton of zone in there and be like, oh, man, look at all the zone that they're running. All right, well, that's good because I guess zone is good. And if Spo does it more than everybody else, that means guys are more prepared. And that means he's the best coach. Look, there's enough basketball people that I respect think he's the best coach. That also helps me inform my opinion on that. You could also go with the Heat culture element. And I'm not saying that in any snarky way whatsoever, because there's a real development success story that seems to happen with the Heat that other teams want to emulate. But is that a Spo thing or is that a development thing? Whatever. There's a lot of factors there that are in his favor when we start talking about the really good coaches. Mazzulla apparently is good now, right? I mean, he has to be. He's in the NBA Finals. Now, I like Mazzulla, but I also don't know necessarily like why. Maybe because I was pushing back on all the people that just thought he was bad. Because I'll tell you right now, if he was giving you those quotes and winning 30 games and not 60 games, the public would be like, this guy's terrible and he's not even ready for it. But since Mazzulla is in the NBA Finals 2 games away from winning a title, he has to be kind of, with the way we do this, default a really good head coach. Doc Rivers, who I think is a good coach for the right team, an older team with veterans, guys with real status in the league, not younger players. But Doc, I don't even think he's allowed to be considered a good coach anymore because of the resume. And the resume stuff can always get in the way of really getting through the weeds of this. It gets back to that simple thing. Well, if this coach has done this and this other coach hasn't done that, then that coach can't be better than the coach that's done it. This is going to go away because of Luka's ascension and whatever could potentially happen, especially if they were to come back and win a title against the Celtics. We know Luka's going to be the best player in the world on all the shows the next morning. But let's go back to a time that isn't that long ago where Trae Young makes an Eastern Conference Finals. Luka makes a Western Conference Finals. They put up both huge stats. Luka has a disappointing season last season. Trae's had multiple disappointing seasons with this team. And you're like, well, how much of a gap is there really between those two guys? Because your podcast didn't slow down. they've only made it to a conference finals, and here are the stats, and here's the bad year. And it's like, you really think that those two guys are even in the same fucking solar system? You do. But that's what happens with resumes. So if I were continuing the exercise, I remember at one point I was like, okay, so you're always looking at the coaching stuff that annoys you, the way coaches are talked about. You find somebody that isn't that good record wise, that doesn't have a deep playoff resume, that you think is a good coach. I was like, you know what? I like the stuff Terry Stotts runs. I remember that epiphany when I was watching the Trailblazers. just happened. He was there 9 years. They won 56% of the games. He won 35% of his playoff games. He also must be doing something right in these interviews. There have to be some of these coaches that everybody collectively comes to the point where like, this guy's an idiot. Like, why? Because they don't have a good team and they haven't won, or maybe they had a decent team because they had Dame and there was some stuff I liked about Portland. But you get the point. Like, I was making myself find a coach one season where I go, let's find somebody that has no resume, where you're like, I actually like a lot of the stuff that they do. I like a lot of the stuff that they run, but maybe even the X's and O's aren't the full part of the daily routine of it. But he was there almost an entire decade. The outcoached thing, the default outcoached after somebody wins or loses a series, it will always annoy me until people can be more specific. How did you come to that conclusion? What happened in the series where you think the coach that lost was outcoached? Because we get really predictable about playing the results with this stuff. Let's say somebody experiments with a rotation. Like, these five guys barely played together. That 5-man group had played 12 minutes all regular season and they lost. Well, then you're an idiot. But if you changed up your rotations and played 5 players together in a playoff game that had never played before and you won, that would mean it was great coaching and that you were experimenting. Last second shots, decoy, wide open look on like a second option, miss. Why are you having him take the shot? Step back 3, contested by 3 different players from 30 feet from the star. Coach put his players in the right position. You lose a playoff game, didn't have the guys ready. Win a playoff series, had the guys ready to play. Development. Team drafts a can't-miss lottery pick, makes the all-star team in his 3rd season. This coach can now develop talent. Same team, different lottery pick, an absolute reach. The guy stinks, wasn't going to be good anywhere. If you're losing, that means that coach can't develop. Why am I bringing up all of this stuff? Well, would Hurley have made any difference with the Lakers? Okay, and let's get this on the record. I love him. I love watching his team at UConn play. It's so clear that there's a level of respect that almost is a little touch of fear. I think a little touch of fear is good, that you feel like you have to do it for your coach, that you want to be accountable. Maybe we can throw a couple different descriptors on that. But I think just a little bit of fear, which is probably really rare at any level of college, certainly pro sports right now, but just something where you feel like, I need to execute this the way that he would approve. I think that's still important, although kind of rare. And Hurley had that at UConn. I don't know, you're going to have that in the NBA. He's a Glastonbury guy, as you know. And if you're just learning this, I got some history there. Grandparents are buried there. Father played high school basketball for the Hawks, was a standout in the early 60s. I lived there. They have the best Mexican food I've ever had. And Cerruti, our guy, a Glastonbury native. Hell, 2 guys I grew up with, I think, plow his driveway. So I'm a little biased. I'm always going to root for Hurley. But I think most of us would agree that even with Hurley being better than Darvin Ham, which I think most of us are okay admitting, what is he actually coaching this year with this Lakers team? They went 47-35. They were a 7th seed, granted, in a packed Western Conference. But that's with 71 games from LeBron, somehow at 39 years old, playing the most games that he played in 6 seasons. And Anthony Davis playing 76 games, which is one more than his career high ever played in 12 years. So you want to bet on that happening again? The new 3rd guy. Okay, this imaginary yet obtainable new 3rd guy, which the Lakers, I think, if they want to do it, can find that guy. Now, there's some Reeves trade where I think, you're probably going to regret that one, where other players on this imaginary list, and I probably shouldn't call it imaginary, but I think you get the point of the exercise. This guy who we don't know who he is yet, if the Lakers just go all in, which I think they'll have to with LeBron at 39 going into 40, whoever that third guy, there's some people in a Reeves transaction where I go, okay, that one would make some sense. So now you've got a new third guy, but you have the same health. You have the Hurley fairy dust on top of it all. What's the best thing you can do with that group? Is it a 4 seed? And the Buss family, who would, I'd say, as great as they've been with the Lakers, they're not one of the more loaded families. So they're going to pay $70 million for what exactly again? Now, maybe they just wanted something different. Maybe they wanted something at the coaching level where it felt like they were just showing how serious they were. And for Hurley to turn this down, by the way, I've seen this written that it's some massive embarrassment for the Lakers. I just don't see it that way. Like, shouldn't you think it's great that they were proactive and tried to go get the number one guy in college right now, and they think it'd be a right fit, and that Hurley and LeBron could get on the same page, even though I still think the demeanor of Hurley at the NBA level, like after 82 games, that might be something he'd have to dial down a little bit. I don't blame the Lakers for trying, and I don't blame the Lakers for not having it work out. I don't know what would have changed is, I guess, the money. Apparently, if Hurley has a deal on the table, it's 6 years and $50 million, but it isn't signed yet based on some reports. Maybe he wanted to scare UConn for a little bit. Maybe that total number gets something added to it, and that's what this all was. Or maybe he actually woke up one day and said, I do want to be the Lakers head coach, and then woke up another day and said, I actually don't want to do it, which has happened a lot, especially with the guys transitioning from somewhere where they're really comfortable to feeling all in and then going, you know what, I can't do it. I don't know. Maybe there was some other reason if Hurley, in fact, was going to do it. Maybe he got more information and decided, you know what, I'm going to change my mind and stay at UConn. Here's the last thing that I want to hit on with this, because now what we have, whenever we look at the college guy leaving to go to the professional ranks, it becomes a referendum on where college sports are right now. All right. Because right now in football and basketball, because that's the one that we really care about when it comes to the NIL and recruiting and everything that goes along with it, everyone that loves college sports is telling us how terrible the state of college sports are currently. And there's some arguments that I would hear. I'm sure it's a major pain in the ass now with the NIL stuff. There'll be corrections. I think, didn't Boise say we're not even doing it anymore? I'm sure there's a lot of people that threw money around in the beginning thinking that it was the new version of free agency that are going, well, that wasn't worth it. Now that guy's playing at our rival in the same conference. So what's the point of all this stuff? But I would point to, hey, in 2014, there were 5 coaches in college football making $5 million or more. Going into the start of this season, I think that number is going to be at 40 coaches. Don Draper, that's what the money's for. I'm sorry the job is tougher, but the job has also exploded as far as how lucrative it can become and rewarding you for all those years you slept on somebody's couch as a GA and just hopping around and moving your family all over the place. It's a very, very tough profession, which adds a new layer of challenges, which I completely understand, but you're now being paid more than anyone ever possibly imagined. So there's a limit on how much sympathy that I'm going to have for anybody in this position. But the people that love it, the people that love the sport, and I love this sport, will point to a Harbaugh leaving Michigan saying, well, that's a warning, right? Maybe it was the money. Maybe it was him going back saying, I didn't actually accomplish the full mission with the Niners, so I want to do it again with the Chargers. Chip Kelly was at UCLA as the head coach, decided to go to Ohio State to be the top assistant there. He's one of the 3 highest paid assistants. I think his deal's $6+ million for 3 years there. But why would he leave a head coaching gig when you know Chip? It's like, would he really ever want to have to answer to somebody else? Well, maybe it's Ryan Day because of that relationship, or maybe it's because UCLA's broke, or maybe he felt like maybe I'm out of here in a year, so I'm going to go ahead and pick my next job before I'm forced to see what's available for me. But does that mean that's a wake up to college football? Maybe. Jeff Hafley, the head coach at Boston College, he goes and decides to become an assistant in Green Bay. What does that mean? That seems a little weird. Well, 4 years at BC, he was 22 and 26. I know they were better this year, but did he see the writing on the wall and say, maybe I'll get ahead of this? Or is it because college football is in so much trouble? And then we'll have the Kentucky offensive coordinator, Liam, mentioned, and it's like, well, he went to Tampa Bay. So now we start to kind of list, as I always point out when people are making arguments, you'll have a couple good examples, and then you're like, hey, let me just keep listing things that match the argument that I'm trying to make. You've got Kingsbury at USC, but that one actually makes sense because I'm not even sure it really counts because he was kind of in this waiting period of wondering what the next move was going to be because he wasn't going to take over at SC. So the point that I'm making here is that the people that love the college sports, the old school version of college sports, will point to all of these as examples of why it's broken. Hey, It may be broken or it may be adjusted, but it's certainly different. We all agree on that. But what does Hurley staying mean? Does that mean that you could point to that and say maybe it's not that bad? And as we know, this is not the only example that we have in daily life where you're pointing to the things that enhance your argument while simultaneously ignoring all the things that could defeat your argument, because that's what we do every single day. But for Hurley, it probably wasn't about the college challenges or the NBA challenges. It may have been more about, as good as I am and as much as I'm ready for the challenge, the Lakers challenge, because of roster, because of age, and because of some of the dynamics of that power structure, maybe that was enough for me to flirt, but ultimately say no.